Hello everyone, today we talk about this thing I decided to do now with the beginning of a series dedicated to, let's say, monsters, beasts, and animals in the medieval imaginary, right? This idea that is I define like this because it could have been a series about mysteries or kind of more, let's say, history of religion, especially oriented content. Instead, I want to come up with this in a very, almost experimental way, right? That is not really gonna look deeply, especially the history of religions, anthropology, of course, right? A lot of this aspect, but really trying to, right, to increase, I would say, the awareness on the depth of the medieval, also ancient, thinking and natural philosophy, if you want, um, because we're gonna trace here, and today we will explain it better, the idea that there's nothing like a medieval interpretation of the world properly meant, that there is a great stream that, as a matter of fact, arrives up to our times, and that we are somewhat neglecting and pretending that it's not there, or that we substitute it with other things, but still these creators that populate medieval imagination, but also encyclopedias, right, and many other, I would say, spaces even of medieval art, right, and architecture, and a lot of, let's say, of these animal figures that still live next to us, sometimes literally, right, as pets, for example, other times as really some kind of unconscious symbolism that we still hold, right? And if you watch, I don't know, if you were rising as a kid watching Disney movies, you can't have not developed sort of sensitivity and imagination about certain space, certain environments. Like when we talk about animals specifically, we're looking at something behind it. It's effectively the meaning attached to them and their human interpretation, because this is gonna be, first of all, this is not an animalist video. Like, I love animals, I must say, but I'm not an animalist, and there are lots of things also we have to discuss in that regard that you may agree or disagree on. It's not even the point of the video, but that have to make you understand that I'm not going straight from the general plan I have here in Schwerpunkt to discuss certain aspects can be useful really for the history of thought, and also associated actually to military culture, right? We know that animals were dramatically important for lots of the warriors and other fighters that we comment, we discuss. We even made some videos about, I don't know, for example, Celtic. In that video I called them totemic animals. We're not quite totemic actually, and explain it in it why it's the case. But let's say of these figures, these characters of nature that somewhat represent and come from a world that, yes, is in contact with humanity, but also is not quite just human, and that our ancestors looked into and thinking of finding an answer and a meaning and a deeper wisdom to cope with the world they knew at the time. So today I would like to talk to you specifically how I plan to do this, like trying to research an interpretative code of how could we talk about a certain thing like that. I will not update this frequently. I think we will talk about it like once every 2 weeks or something like that. And it will be also fairly short, differently from other series that basically never end, right? Like the von Clausewitz one that we started last year. We're still at 1/3 of the von Kriege. Or others that are literally infinite, like all the potential videos we could make in a about warfare, right, of every age, right? We're never running out of information, of topics and things like this. But definitely there's a big space that the natural world has in the, even literally in the military ethos, right? Of the peoples we're studying. We've seen it dramatically frequently in those videos, in fact, but even the Roman religion, or other, I don't remember actually other great deal, but we discussed things like this for nomadic populations, and we will definitely get more in depth those topics also aside I mean, these animal associations, even aside from this specific series, right? But this is at least gonna be organized with like a reference to like an animal every video. Like we will talk about, I don't know, the wolf, the bear, even things like the dragons, right? So it doesn't have to be technically just real creatures, but here the distinction is not very important, and even for the people of the time, objectively it wasn't, because I mean, for those people it was normal to think there were unicorns or dragons, or and it's the point here is really the approach to nature that we'll see now, that is important to try to grasp, at least, and to be a bit, more enchanted in the way we look at the past than we usually are, but also to understand how this still impact today. And this is nothing to give for granted, in my opinion, right? If you wonder where does that friendship and special bond between mankind and a certain species of animals especially comes, right? Where also the fear or the distrust or even the disgust, telling the truth, that mankind feels towards certain others. Like, not always, as different cultures in fact vary in this regard, but there are certain elements in common that we could explore, so certain common symbolisms that effectively are shared by so many cultures around the world that also didn't quite met each other consistently to have a significant impact on the development of certain symbols or other patterns of interpretation, right? And so if you look at this period of the old medieval legends, well, you can easily look at how many animals are actually protagonists of this, not only in a superstitious or pre-scientific way, but also actually with a much deeper meaning. I remember my exam of Germanic philology at university several years ago. I had to read this beautiful Reinhard Fuchs that is basically this 12th century poem attributed to Heinrich von Glickesheere, who basically we came from Alsace, and he is looking at contemporary politics. This is essentially an allegoric poem, right? It talks about animals. Also, Reinhard, this is the fox, is the protagonist, but there is a great symbolism in it, in which, for example, you can redraw all the criticism and the satire of that time, Germany, towards the politics of Frederick Barbarossa, right? That is symbolized as a lion. And then he does various things. He does sense in there's this reference to Italy, that the Italians were all these ants that you could crush one nest, but from the others remain. And eventually the lion splits into four parts. This symbolizes the four chunks of the empire. I mean, you can see this immense, in that case, of artistical, poetic, and intelligent look at the society of the time. This dramatic vivacity and perspicacity of the medieval man in that regard. So you sometimes you're even brought to necessarily inquire on what are the symbols, what are these animals really symbolizing, and where does this this characterization actually come from, right? Because especially in those times, it's very fascinating. There were so many beliefs and and traditions that came actually from a very distant past. Aside from Christianization, was actually stemming from much deeper backgrounds, and also Christianity in part adopted, right? There is this idea that Christianity substantially erased this set of beliefs and traditions and customs and memories from the past, but in part it is true, it has partly modified, in part erased them, but in great part has also adopted them. This is often overlooked and misunderstood, as generally speaking in those times there was, and also in Christian art in general, you can realize that there is always a great attention towards symbolism of different kinds, of also natural kind. Think about same Christian symbols per excellence, like the fish the deer, the lamb, but not just that. If you look at the geography, it's full, especially in early medieval times, it's full of animal symbolism of very different kinds. But think even about Saint Francis of Assisi, and so on. So you find actually countless examples of a society that we think at one point was left behind, but actually is still here in many ways, right? That we are not, if there is a time in our life that's still, in our history, excuse me, that really characterizes us still, it's so that influences us very much is the ancient medieval world. Like modern age, contemporary age have been relatively nothing, especially in comparison, when you realize certain ways, certain channels that have remained literally unaltered from from those times. Don't think that there are not these lesser streams that still pour and are very very alive, right? So what this series is going to be fundamentally is an inquiry on the original characters of the symbols and the genesis in the contemporary imaginative. This is another great challenge. Like, we know that these times had a massive influence on us, but it's not easy for us now to distinguish what is what, right? It's a very complicated task. We can fail easily, and especially misinterpreting all these meanings. So naturally, in the last decades, if you look at fields like cultural anthropology, psychoanalysis, ethology, right? Well, you realize that we have learned a lot on the animal world, right? And especially also with this relation with mankind, right? That you can think that, that there is just biological, zoological dimension that you can study as such, but no, there is a strong contact that we have with the animal world, the rest of the animal world to be precise. There is something that if you had inquired like this in Middle Ages was something normal, right? There were different attitudes in that regard, but the concept of the creation in the Bible is quite open about that. I mean, God has created the earth and its living beings to be effectively controlled by man. That is, man exercises seigneury on the world and its creatures. That is fundamentally the model that follows the same pattern, the one that God has towards man. And this is a very deep anthropological realization, right? The fact that humanity has realized, mankind has realized that its role, it's something, higher, right? That objectively, as animals, we have developed our neurological capacities in a dramatically different way from other animals. We are self-aware of a lot of things animals are not. And this loads us with responsibility for it, right? We're not just one of the many. Objectively, in our subjective objectivity, this is true, right? This is real. And it has consequences, like it has ethical, in fact, implications, as we were saying. But also it's something that it would strike you to realize how much was clear at the time and how fundamentally it is not today, right? Don't think even the process of secularization in parallel to the one of modernization had a big deal of an effect in here, because if you know the Bible, for example, you know that this should be a, if you read Genesis, that's pretty clear what the message and the relation of mankind with the creation really is, right? And the point here is something that therefore touches also other fields that they're not strictly cultural, right? It also have to do with our individual experiences that are physical, if you want. Think about the world of dreams, right? I don't know. Well, okay, now I will not descend into details. I know nothing of how human mind works, whether our knowledge of the animal world is somewhat impacting us in a more or less incisive way, our dream experiences, for example. But think about, as we were saying before, pets, right? Lifetime companions, or even animals as source of energy, or raw material, or naturally food. So the animal that therefore has such deep, intimate relations with mankind that can come to appreciating of either a connaturation, like we spot the similarity with animals, or also um, I would say an interpretative choice deliberately from the side of mankind of heteronaturality. That is to say, we spot in the animals something um, different from us, and that is very powerful, right? We all know that we appreciate animals essentially for certain characteristics that eventually strike us, that we can both either recognize in us, but also observe it in a very different nature, very different character in the animal itself. So from here, different cultural models and constructions were built. All right, so that we can't see the animal as a threat, in certain cases more than legitimately, right? We can stress the feline aspect, or even a sort of inferiorization. Like, it's very bad in my opinion, like to say animals are stupid, or like there's attitude, like a cynical take on reality of like that these are beasts or brutes, right? And they're not like us. We're so smart and intelligent. We know also that this doesn't make sense, because evolution has made this all, has built all these creatures in a way that they perfectly fit um, their own environment in a certain sense. There is a constant change in this regard, but they all have a space. They all have, more than just a genetic code. They're contextualized, right, in a way. So as much as we are, right, and then naturally in relation with other animals, we all are. Tending to rationalize an animal identity is very difficult, right? It doesn't make sense, like thinking that there are animals that are useless or that are more useful, right? Unless you have a narrow goal at that specific moment, it doesn't make quite of a sense. So attitudes like brotherhood, affection, extraneity, fear, even enmity, in the relation between mankind and animals, or with the various animals according to certain hierarchies of values that have to do with the mythical or scientific visions in the various cultures, and that often also represent so many other alibis for cruelty or and avidity from the side of humans, for example, are, I think, a big deal in our world, and we never had a concrete discussion, I think, as a civilization about this, right? We still we have a very we're very easily forgetful of what are the implications of what we can solve immediately, apparently easily, right, and without so many consequences. And animals got in the way and were ran over, right, in many circumstances. So on the other hand, if you look at the close relation between men and animals, well, this comes also in another interesting field that is the linguistical transfer and of extraneation of, in force of which we used to attribute to animals certain human vices like canine rage or serpentine disloyalty, etc. Right, and on the contrary, there is also our tendency to explain anthropocentrically through pulsions and feelings that are close to ours, of gestures of animals that evidently catch our attention, right? And this is explicitly seen in works like the Panchatantra or the works of Aesop or Phaedrus, right? But even up to things like Mickey Mouse, I mean, literally, these are speaking animals in comics, right? So it's a very ambiguous, if you think, process of extraneation, but at the same time of osmosis that is typical of our own culture, that we take animals after all as easy points of reference in a certain sense to compare our behaviors. And this naturally stems from the fact that we have a lot in common with animals, a lot of genotype, and there is nothing we can do about it, and we have similar behaviors, we have a lot in common, and we even get fascinated, having overdeveloped our mental functions to observe probably how other creatures are so much more coherent, if you want, in their specific existential, I would say, role, right? But that's also a very anthropocentric take on it, that compared to us, right? Because we are still sorting out what the hell are we doing here. These animals it seems they have understood everything in the first place, right? Obviously, this is a metaphorical interpretation, but meaning, think about how many also survivalistic, or I don't know how to say this, ideals, this coming back to the forest, to the wilderness, etc., as a lifestyle, right? I don't really get along very well with those ideas, because I think in very very different terms what the human role in civilization is. But that to see, how powerful it is, the call, right, of the natural world, that we have somewhat failed and left behind and destroyed or changed irreversibly sometimes, right? Humans have killed a freaking lot of species up to this point. There's not much we can do about it anymore, and we're continuing to do that. So the lifestyle of the last generations has objectively detached us from the animal world, right? I think only one aspect, that up to the 20th century, most of the people actually lived in the countryside. Today, most people live in the cities, right? Think of the massive change in mindset in that regard. And I think this has given the illusion, especially in the West. I don't know whether this is you agree with this. That, however, that the mankind, the man, in our culture at least, has become somewhat milder and more civil in his relation with animals, right? Which is pretty debatable, right? And many things for which up to a few years ago an animal was necessary, now we do it with machines, and many animal products that are substituted with materials of different origin. And then I think our creeping daily hypocrisy makes the rest, in the sense that many of us get outraged in front of such actually different phenomena, such as hunting, vivisection, or the corrida, right? Or while, for example, the spectacle of even the domestic animals that are impiously abandoned by families that are leaving for vacations, or that are ran over by cars, they're corpses you can see along the roads. Now we don't anything feel like that. Oh, poor kitty, poor dog is dead, killed. But then we go and we think about something else. Now probably if you're not driving with that, you're probably looking at your phone, not even looking out of the car window anymore. So we are massively detached, I think, from this, from even the awareness that there is all a world out there that we would not surely want to live in largely anymore, but the animals do, for example. It's a pretty, you might think it's a silly thinking like that, but it's about our common genetics that should make us feel how actually close we potentially are to fit in similar situations, and how we were up to a very few millennia ago. Right? A very few millennia ago, we were all hunter-gatherers. We lived next to animals, right? Herds of animals. We followed them. It was everything to us. We look at the centrality of in that video of Celtic animals, we looked at it, how progressively with sedentarization of the Celts and the development of their society, that in artistical depictions the animal initially was something big and it was man gravitating around it. The more time passes, the more it's the other way. The man gets bigger and all the animals are smaller, and then eventually it's the man at the center and the animals around. Like to stress this idea that now, I don't know, the country had been subdued with all its creatures, and that mankind was evolving in that regard. And some other cultures actually display that easily as well, right? And also, I mean, if you live in Europe, at least, but everywhere, a big city, I would say that you can still see coaches all around for tourists, right? And with that, now gets so much triggered about, I don't know, watching a horse being whipped by the coachman, right? That's their job. I remember once I looked at these two. I think it was in Vienna. There were two horses of a coach. There was one was visibly tired, like it was tired, but not just for the day, but for even all the days before. It was the other horse next to him. It was towards the late afternoon. It was like with his head poking the tired one, saying, "Oh, come on, we're almost done for today. Don't cheer up." Like, and yeah, that's something touching. That's something that also, however, animals seem to be aware of. Like that, animals, especially horses, are terribly intelligent, participative. They have an enormous awareness of what is going on and what their role should be. And there is a certain pride that you can easily see, right? We know even from military history that horses actually have a dramatic independence in the idea that they bite, they punch with their head, with their hooves. They're terribly, you must rely on the horse largely. Like there is nothing like a good cavalry if the horse is is kind of not a good one, and he doesn't have strong connection, strong bond with the cavalryman, right? The horse can be good, vice versa, and the horsemen suck, and that you can't have. There must be this strong connection, this bond that is instinctive, but also that you see there is an equine intelligence behind that. That there is a pride and a feeling. Think of all these great figures in history of Bucephalus, for example, of these horses that, as we will see, they had a terrific religious symbolism, and they were attached to the skies and the earth and war, right? As we come also looking at chivalry and discussing these topics frequently. We know that what the origins of these of this bond between the knight and his horse actually stem from millennia of history, since in the Eurasian steppes of so many millennia ago. And yet we now simply look at the horse and say, okay, yeah, Will probably goes horse riding and knows all these things, knows about this nobility, this pride, this greatness, but what about most of the people think about horses? Like they even make them. We have a tendency, I think, to make animals less intelligent than what actually are, right? And you can see it even from the history of war, right? Especially of cavalry, there is a lot there that makes you reflect. But also, what about the most banal thing, like the zoos, like biological parks now they're called? Like, what's so more disgusting in a time in which we have movies about literally everything that we don't even have the time to watch to keep animals in cages, right? Unless there is not a sometimes it's actually a positive thing, because either they are protected or they are preserved and brought up for breeding, etc. I mean, that's another story. But the zoo at the end of an actual entertainment, like in fact, I think they're slowly disappearing. Like there is not great interest even. Who does go to watch animals on purpose? Like I don't think it makes any sense today anymore. These things are fortunately going to end. But even if you look at your cages for your birds, right? I don't know how actually happy they are to be there. Like they may love you, they may have this attachment. They may not know, especially if they were born in captivity, what's outside. But at the same time, is it like the right thing for them? Like, is it your personal enjoyment, amusement important? Like for a cat, objectively, turns out living in an apartment is quite fine. I mean, they don't seem to get, but there is still a compromise behind it. Like the idea is what is that you would want for the animal. What is that? How do you see actually you related to the animal in that context? Like, is it the animal an accessory? Is it something that I don't know? And these are interesting. I mean, I'm not judging people. I'm just saying that these are interesting talks to have in the first place, and that we don't have for some reason. Also, well, some of the most disgusting goes from costly furs, like animals are massacred, and by the way, killed some in the most horrific ways, much more than a bull during the corrida, for example. For not talking naturally about the mass killings in the slaughterhouses, there's something like immense. No, I'm not going to suggest you to watch, how you can look at a pig ripped in half in all these places and see to gross you out. But we know that there are, right. We know that this is going on, but we rarely picture it in the sense that we picture what this could be from this subjective point of view, and also from a large scale, right? Because I don't think human beings are actually at the same level of animals. Like, I do think we have we have something called responsibility. That is, animals share in part, but in a more instinctive way, in which there is another rationalization, right? We do know that animals have limits in this regard. So the matter is, yes, we are above the animal world in this regard, but this means to bear more responsibility, right? None of those people say no. Like, you shouldn't ever eat any form of animal in this, or animal products, right? Could be, like, if personally, I don't have anything bad to do with it. I think I'm one of that silent, overwhelming majority of people who says, killing animals sounds and is effectively horrible, right? For as long as there is an option not to do it, like for hunting, for example. Sometimes we are obliged to put some animals down because those can cause damage, and certain species must be controlled, and there is a responsibility in that, right? But the point here is also there is also an alternative, right? And what happens in the world also doesn't quite fit, we know it, a perfectly mathematical, economical thing. We could easily eat in a different way that wouldn't involve the massacre and terrible suffering of all these animals. I'm not doing anything about it, really. I love meat. It's one of my favorite food. I know it can be disturbing for some, and it objectively is, but I'm still not doing anything. But if, I lived in a context where I was still aware of the possibility I could choose, right, and the world would suddenly turn in a, I don't know, vegetarian way, let's put it in this way, I would go along with that, because I don't produce food for myself, I just buy it, right? You could say, well, but then you wouldn't, why did you buy meat? You shouldn't do it. Well, my point is a bit, actually, like, when there are these problems here, I always answer, like, but there are lots of other things that you don't give a freaking damn about, for which you should stop doing a lot of things if you really cared about life in general, which is impossible to do. Like, even if you buy a plastic product, you technically kill animals, right? Even if it's not direct, right? So saying, okay, let's not buy meat, but wait, first we should reassess a little bit of things here in mass productions and economy, right? It's not a simple thing. And all this happening in moments in which we make disastrous, horrible, and uncalculated political and social choices that kill constantly hundreds of thousands of actual human beings and animals as well, that nobody gives a freaking damn about. So to me, it makes me laugh to simply say, okay, do not buy the animal product and just, I don't know, voting for a certain direction, or still buying other stuff that we know that pollutes the environment, or however causes damage in general, will bring to the death of someone or another living creature, right? So it's not about the individual thing here, even though those animals suffer individually, that's horrible, but the point is also realizing that there is a much greater and equal sufferance of that kind, that goes on at so many levels, and nobody does a freaking damn. So here you have to revise your moral standards. What are you effectively doing for thinking the world in a way that can be better? Simply, picking, vegetables instead of meat in a supermarket is not a hero choice. That's the way I see it. And don't think, once again, that I don't feel for it. Like, I think, especially if I visit a slaughterhouse, I would be impressed enough to start questioning much of my ethics. But I already know I don't believe like that. I don't have that experience. I have other things to think. I'm selfish. I'm egoist. I'm human, and that's the deal, right? But still, there are things we can do better in other fields that can help in the same way, and still we don't do it. That's my point. And don't think that here mankind is by its nature a cruel murderer, right? Modern civilization has not taught to mankind to be better, right? Not even to be necessarily worse, right? I think that civilization has a role, has a purpose. It's a freaking dangerous thing, but it's also a terrific opportunity. It has an enormous potential. Right, but at the same time, you can see that while we praise consciously how progressed and modern and intelligent and evolved we are, on the other hand, we don't recognize as full hypocrites how we're still effectively murderers of the world, right, of the creation, so that we can feel better with our conscience with it. So with all of this, the animals, however, not only are still there, but they keep having effectively a scenery in our imaginary. This is, I think, one of the most fascinating things of our society. That it doesn't matter how modern, how secular we are. I mean, animals have an enormous impact in our world. You can see it from psychoanalysis, from mythology. We still see them that are clothed with their archetypic aspects as divine or demonic symbols, right? They are arcane instigators of vices and virtues. They're there. They populate our minds. I don't know how to explain this from a scientific point of view. I don't know whether we developed, in fact, as a species, this for sure, right? But not as a species. I mean, as actual living beings, this sensitivity towards other creatures that we evidently know and have shaped, even if we don't know them rationally, maybe, because if you're a kid you might have not seen what animals are, right? Most of us, actually, none of us knows all the animals that live in the world, right? But we still have this receptivity that is written in our genes, right? If an animal hisses at you and shows its canines, you can see there that that's not particularly good, right? And you can instinctively recognize it. You don't need to have seen that animal before. That's very fascinating, because that touches you immediately in your internal chords, right? And you can feel fully that bond, that sense. I mean, just think, we live in aseptic places, in apartments, in cities, in blocks, right? But think about, as everybody will, fortunately, we still live in a world in which this is pretty easy to do, and we do every once in a while, going out on a field, in a forest, and just feel, the different level of awareness and stimulation that you get sensorially, but also internally, emotionally speaking, when you hear, I don't know, um, all these sounds, also just of nature in itself, like of the wind in the tree leaves, or also, the heat of the sun, the murmuring of the cicadas, right? You feel something that somewhat grows closer to a paradoxically more natural way. It's as if, I don't know, from my point of view, it's as if I realized that I can, with my reason, I can live in a better world than that, and it can make me obtain more. But it's as if I were positively shaped and even consumed by nature in that regard. That sounds, that feels natural, even with food. Like, it can seem strange, but you know, I if you buy things at supermarkets, industrial products, etc., you eat them, right? You can like them for some reason, but all the stuff that they put in it is actually really sucks. But at least it tastes good. You're happy about it, okay? But even going to, take a car and going to a town in the country, somewhere traditional, etc., you start eating something really feels way more natural, and it has a very different feeling on you. It's sometimes even overwhelming. Certain smells, certain tastes that really bring you back to a way that commits much more, if you want, yourself to them as an experience, right? And we are gradually asepticizing our existence from that reality that we should get used to enjoy more, but we can't. Why? Because we realize we can't do more, apparently, in the way we do now. Naturally, this can be criticizable if you are, I don't know, obliged to do it. Let's assume you don't have enough money. You have to work every day, and that's definitely the drama of so many realities. But that's not just it. Like things like inequality or oppression, things like those. I mean, historically speaking, have always existed. Like, it's not that I don't know, with the Industrial Revolution things got worse, right? It's just that they could get more dysfunctional as general systems, but also they could. I mean, there was something that went through the meat grinder more easily, right? But just think that something terrifying, actually, that from the Industrial Revolution onwards, we're effectively relying on supply systems, production systems that, of course, are very well organized, and they have backup plans and things like those, but that we don't know individually how to make it work anymore. Like, in pre-industrial times, most of the people knew how to survive by themselves, right? If it had to be a major world catastrophe, our civilization would be the first one to crumble. Hunter-gatherers that actually still exist in the world would be the best survivors, would probably the ones that would teach others, the survivors, to keep surviving, let's say, and to and this is fascinating because it's as if you could feel at that point the potential of our civilization, but also the inherent risks that are always going parallel, right? The same with destruction, the same with pros and cons of any kind. So we don't know, I think, anymore, the man that has lived in the centuries this relation with those beings that were continuously close to them, that had within this relation of similarity and familiarity that could be more or less articulated, but that, however, remained undeniable, and that served him in war, in hunting, in working, for feeding, for transportation, and clothing, right? And that could even molest him, and threaten him, or even play with him, right? Well, all these worlds now are largely forgotten, right? But we still have the relics of the myths and the models for that humans art, right? We can still see from the past how much animals prominently figured in those same worlds. So historically speaking, we have traces of an enormous, a massive amount of of evidence about relation between mankind and animals that we can work on to assess what it could be like, right? So naturally we could start telling at this point legends or drawing other archetypical images, but it's evident that we have to deal with them in this series, but at the same time we must be always critical, right? Spiritually speaking, we have to be committed to the concretely historical and philological side without simply saying, okay, well, let's imagine in general, right? Like using fantasy. No, we can, we don't have to pretend that in this world that is so much more emotional in some ways than rational, because it has to do with relations, right? That that what we feel today is enough to fully understand or to expand at least into that relation that existed before between mankind and animals. So what I would like to do in this series is, of course, to even re-evoke those fascinating old images about animals, right? And in the myths, in the legends, in art. I mean, those are very powerful because they can transmit to you. Art can do this. Like, art can really transmit to you a sort of not really necessarily a universal language, but a core of it for sure. Like the idea that you can look at art being influenced by the world you live in, right? Which is definitely true. But there are certain core ideas, that the feelings, I would say better, that really are still there. And yet, the best thing we can do, if we really want to try to understand this, is to reason on them. Right, we have to be able to spot, for example, certain languages in the art, in the legends, and not simply the the most evident image that comes from it, but also what for those people's such memory actually meant, what it was functional to, right? So in part, also we will have to answer where does the special friendship and relation with mankind, between mankind and certain animal species that are not necessarily domestic. Oh, that's quite important to remember. Stem from, right? Where does the fear, the distrust, and disgust that mankind feels towards other animals, for example? So when we look, for example, at older medieval legends that have animals as protagonists, we should always wonder, I mean, are these like superstitions or pretty scientific views, right? Or is there actually something deeper, something different that we're not used to seeing there anymore? Rather than that, for those people instead were so clear, so evident, so immediate means without a medium, like it came straight at them because they perfectly knew what that entailed. That's a massive challenge, but I mean a really big one. So naturally we will have also to set some certain time standards, right? Also, I don't think we should in this regard look at the most ancestral times, to go back in prehistory. I mean, we can. I think it's easier to look at so many things at that point. It would be very, very difficult, right? If we would have to look at history of religion, paleontology, archaeology, zoology, etc. Right? So I don't have so many competences at one, and I simply can't do this for you. But I think that we can't we should be more careful in general about, because this is an exercise, right? This is not about trying to draw an homogeneous and deterministic idea of what is the relation between the animal and mankind in itself. It's impossible. Like every culture, as we were saying in the beginning, has different views on this, right? So I think it's more useful to look at all the various, chronological and cultural turns that certain, smaller contexts can give us. Right? Smaller in just in part, right? And also considering that regard, naturally, how far are they from us? Like, if can we spot certain mental or material rips of like certain major changes in our view of these things for some reason. And here we have always to contextualize the thing historically, also on a linear level, right, or at least in a chronological sense, because uh, you know there have been major changes in the history of mankind. When we passed from hunter-gatherers into agriculturalists and farmers, breeders, right? So also we began to specialize actually in certain different mansions that also produced a higher diversification of the look at the animal, right? Because if you take what we call polytheism, that actually never quite existed as such, there was, however, an asymmetry between the value of animals for depending on different peoples, even those that lived in the same society. I mean, every god had a different. It was associated to different animals, right? And tendentially, and who gravitated around that god because it was, I don't know, marine animals because of Neptune, because we were a sea trader, right? That's one thing. You would be more oriented to look at certain animals in the environment you live in. Certain other animals would be different. Like, think about the wolf, Mars for the Romans. What does that mean? It's a massive, powerful meaning. Then there is this major other change that we discussed before, that is naturally in the 18th century, this process that actually hasn't still finished to take shape in some ways. That is the so-called Industrial Revolution. So we were talking about so many industrial revolutions, right? The first one in the mid-18th, the second one, second half of 19th, and then so many others. I don't know where we arrived at the fifth or whatever. I don't even know. Even heard the seventh. Is it possible? I have no idea. But that's also when the thing loses meaning. But indeed, the Industrial Revolution, as we know it, had an enormous deal. But probably the other major change in this regard is the informatic one, right? The informatic and telematic one of our days, and the first two ones. The third one is somewhat too new to fully understand its full implications. Is that, however, had for sure and deeply changed the relation between humans and animals, right? And which definitely brings to a difficult historical problem that is both epistemological and hermeneutical. That is, what the hell are we talking about, chronologically speaking? Like, is there a medieval thing? Like, if we start to talk now about the Middle Ages, how much sense does it make to effectively address the symbolism? Talking about medieval stuff. Like, I probably use it so that people say, oh, look, the medieval animals, those kind of things. I look on memes and about bestiaries, and let me click on it, right? It's not really clickbait, but it's at least for you to know what the hell I'm talking about, roughly, around. But as you will see, we will discuss things that date back to, sometimes, to prehistory as well, right? So, this is peculiar, and also, how can we periodize certain eras and ages, right? As Spengler or Frobenius said, these cultural cycles, right? So dividing and rationalizing this time that doesn't exist either really helps to dominate it a bit. but just for didactic sake, but for the actual understanding of deeper meanings at a higher level, it really does not. I mean, objectively, it doesn't help to say that there has been a Middle Ages. As I always tell you, there is no Middle Ages. There's never been anything like the Middle Ages. There are no standards in that regard. You can fix to what we think the Middle Ages are, whichever we do, because, by the way, everybody has a different opinion of it. So that's where the thing gets complicated, because this is not about just learning names and dates that are fundamental. I'm one of those people who tell you, yeah, names and dates are actually very important. Like, they're not important subordinated to other things, of course, but they're the first things you should start from, possibly. But at the same time, it's obvious that a bit of higher levels of historical inquiry, or deeper inquiry, if you want better. This creates a lot of problems. Like, it's very, very difficult to reason in terms like I'm saying this thing because it's medieval. Like, it doesn't exist as such. So how can we generalize sometimes? It's very important. So also, what are civilizations? Because I'm not sure now how we will build this. We will take things from, Indo-Europeans, from the origins of medieval Europe, or Islam, or India, right? So it's very difficult to make a general, but there are still certain elements we can trace that are somewhat in common to certain cultures, right? I think we have made this terrible butchery of trying to rationalize human history by splitting it in different epochs, right? We can't say Vedic India. What the hell does that mean exactly, right? Or a Roman antiquity. What is Roman antiquity as such? I mean, is there something like, even the Christian Middle Ages? What the hell is the Christian Middle Ages? And you know how much, we made on Schwerpunkt we have a playlist of, I think, 70 videos of medieval Christianity. But what the hell that is, right? Exactly. It doesn't make much sense to even to put this question. So Hegel would have answered in this way, like that it was, after all, fairly easy to, to subdivide such things. Brodel has showed us to instead decompose time in at least shorter or longer time, right? But at the same time, how that still can be reconciled with, for example, a personal or collective memory of mankind, right? What can you? This is a big problem with history as well. We have a limited evidence. And this evidence comes from a limited section of society that had different views than others. So how can this be, transferred in terms of self-consciousness, of awareness, of the memory itself, and how much also in historical terms? So this is important, in my opinion, in this context, because the mythical images and archetypical figures of animals or other things, of course, have their own history, have their own dignity, right? And they help a terrific lot to look at this strong interdependence between material conditions and mental attitudes, right? That is somewhat necessary, right? Psychologically speaking, this is very evident. So our imaginary is naturally indecipherable by a certain degree, because it's like a military set of, I don't even know, like this myriad of ideas, of suggestions, of takes on It can be physiological, environmental, cultural, right, and also of different nature in turn, each and every one. But um, and we know perfectly that there is none of these that has conditioned us in an equal way. So we can't, and nor in the same direction, right? So that's really a challenge to even approach. Yet we feel some way. This is something I've talked about also in other videos. That is, we feel that a great deal of our imaginary, contemporary imaginary, right, our times, actually have their roots somewhat essentially in the Middle Ages. Right? And I think, in part it is actually true. I do believe that we have a Freudian relation with the Middle Ages in itself. Like we have repudiated at some point, but it's always there. And we even know that. Like, it's just we don't want to recognize it and come back to look at it. Also, for a process that evidently can't trace a direct psychological parallelism, because that's an individual experience. Maybe you won't look back at the trauma, but you're always in search for it. That's essentially also what I think Freud himself said. But when you talk about societies, well, how does that work exactly? Like, it's not the same relation. There is societies do not work biologically, right? You can't trace, I don't know, biological, evolutionary, terminologies like to explain certain social processes, but they are never quite the same thing. Yet there is a collective consciousness in this regard as well. So it's interesting to look at how this develops. And we must understand what we mean here by that our roots are substantially in the Middle Ages in many cases. So and in order to do it, the best thing you can do is to context it, right? To criticize it effectively. So from school, you know that when we think about the Middle Ages, we're first of all talking about a period of European history. Let's be honest about it. Like, I think it's not entirely true. I think the Middle Ages can be seen by certain standards orientatively, also for the sake of didactic notions, to be seen elsewhere as well, right? There are similar patterns that you can observe throughout a huge chunk of Eurasia, right? But at least canonically, it's the chronological scan that works between the 5th and 15th century. That is, that's really arbitrary. That's really arbitrary. And historians are naturally, and as we've done in Schwerpunkt as well, to criticize rightfully on such periodization. However, in our current imaginary, that is still very influenced by the elaboration of themes, of images that happened in that long and very significant moment of our culture that it's usually called the Romanticism, right? The Middle Ages acquired this special colors and shapes that, albeit not well defined, maybe they're still, however, provided with a very strong evocative charge, right? And so the problem is that when we look at the Middle Ages, we as Westerners, if we pass directly straight through Romanticism. Always, like, you're compromised if you're being raised, in this context, you know that. I realize it. I'm dealing with the Middle Ages from quite a long time now, but I realized that I in my background, in the place where I was born in and being raised, like, that influence is there, and I can't erase it from me. We in the West, we have built largely the idea of Middle Ages on Romanticism, and we keep insisting on it. And what is fascinating is naturally that the Romanticism was not all wrong, right? So it's um, there are aspects that are interest to stress that can be used even as patterns of interpretation, but still the problem remains because many of these characters, romantic characters we attributed to the Middle Ages, lack almost completely historical plausibility, and they're just the result of different aesthetical or ideological processes, right? That have deeply distorted and compromised our understanding of the Middle Ages, right? For many reasons, right? In part, this happened for some common reasons of sort, right? That are possibly also the most interesting to look at, not much because of our understanding of the Middle Ages, but for our understanding of the 19th century and also what was left of it in the Middle Ages in many ways, because I believe, especially talking about politics and warfare, that actually the Middle Ages, if you really want to use such a brutal approximation, okay, from a military point of view, it stops in 1918. I mean, there is no way out of that. It as a political and social model that is translated in the military. I mean, 1918 at the latest in certain countries, of course, of Central and Eastern Europe, especially, but in others also before. And even in there, that's it's questionable because, yeah, from a military point of view, but from a cultural point of view, it's evidently not. You could say, in fact, Middle Ages still exist. But there were different approaches to it as well. I mean, Romanticism was associated to nationalism often. Other times it was more like an artistical expression, right? There were universalists that were romantic in art, for example, but not only, also in politics, right? There were romantic right and left wingers alike. So that makes you understand also what are we talking about, right? Is this more the artistical / aesthetical side of the story? Is this most political / ideological, right? Is there something in between? Yes, there is. But we must be aware that we did pass through that. Like as a medievalist, it's evident. I think most people actually know this, that when we look at the basis of medievalist historiography, we look chiefly at the 19th century. I mean, that's a moment in which objectively had been massive achievements of collections and analysis of sources with different methods, with more, if you want, more rational, right? Military history is born out of studies that came from essentially the second half of the 19th century. Think about Delbrück or other. I mean, and they had naturally a continuity in this regard, but that's a moment in which we have began to feel accurately the Middle Ages from a historical point of view. So we can't deny even that passage as a moment of important. Like, why did it happen at that time? I'm not gonna explain it now, but we have discussed it already in other videos, and whatever the reasons were, they're important because first of all, we're not very far from it, and still most of our background, historiographically speaking, comes from those roots, right? Those are the ones who paved the road, and then we built it on our own, but still we were addressed in a certain direction, or at least we were given certain indications right on that path. So as we were saying, the Middle Ages have never existed. It's just this polemical invention of certain, a pretty lazy one by certain erudites from the 16th and the 17th century. They were essentially quarreling about their relation with the Hellenic and Roman antiquity, and on the legacy that this had left to them, right? And therefore trying to find the causes of the alleged barbarization of that the Euro-Mediterranean civilization had allegedly suffered, at least according to them, from a certain historical phase onwards, right? That incidentally coincided with the crisis of the imperial Roman structures, with the formation of this new religion of Eastern origin, of monotheistic character Christianity in the territory of the empire. So the vision is that the civilization born from out of this crisis was characterized, and this was very dear to modern authors for important political reasons. Of this relation, strong relation, close relation between religious faith and civil institutions, right? But also cultural systems, etc. And this would have eventually, disappeared later on with the rise of a very complex set of doctrines, from politics to science, economy, etc. That would have, in a few centuries now, in the modern age, essentially sanctioned the autonomization of politics, of philosophy, of science from the world of metaphysics and of religion. Hence, if you want to look at the Middle Ages in this regard, you have to think that at least the Middle Ages has gone far beyond the 15th century, at least up to the so-called scientific revolution, right? Scientific or, rationalistic and or empiristic revolution of the 17th, 18th century. That, as we've seen, would have from which actually things like the Industrial Revolution and eventually the political revolutions of the 18th of the 19th century depended on. So, in other words, this makes you see how long the Middle Ages has actually been, even in the key of interpretation that humanists that were medievalists, ironically, medievals, actually were, right? They were criticizing the Middle Ages. We remember them today as medievals, which is pretty fair, right? The Middle Ages, in this sense, can be observed culturally, and there is a spark, more than a spark of truth in this, that definitely pre-industrial society, in pre-industrial times, right? As the French scholars especially call the age of the Ancien Régime, right? And this is true. Why? Essentially, well, because the mentality and memory were perpetuated collectively at this point. Maybe through folklorism, right? So an actual, not just a simple tradition of folklore, but its insistence on it, even for identity reasons, for certain contents or mental attitudes that were organically tied to a scientific system that legitimated them, right? And that eventually, survived also from the obliteration and surpassing of the system. Like, we like to think that we are sons of Descartes and Newton, so that we truly believe in reason, and in science as such, right? And it's a very good thing to do. But we often don't realize that, aside from the fact that the Middle Ages actually believed the same thing, this is still an interpretation, right? That religion, science, and reason actually go in parallel in the Middle Ages. That's where scholastics taught, and it taught it fairly well. I mean, for those time standards, it was really an exceptional achievement. What also Descartes and Newton were studying was sometimes we're criticizing it, especially. It's also interesting to look at the different backgrounds of the two scientists, but also, that was stemming from the same Middle Ages in part. I mean, if you would have looked at Descartes or Newton's beliefs, sometimes, I mean, they were pretty seriously, backwards in many ways, right? Don't think these were, that's another disgusting thing that we do when we look at modernity and progress, that we think that every person that even dared, even in previous times, to challenge the establishment with reason was actually a reasonable person. There weren't reasonable people at all. Like, for our standards, it would be incredibly morally debatable as individuals. But still, what I try to do with also Schwerpunkt is to stress, okay, let's take the good that they did and how they improved the thing, right? So it's not that we have to marry them, but it's simply that, they objectively created something that brought a massive ideal, even before the material achievement to our civilization, right? So it's as if all this, so that complicates also what it means to be a rational person. There is a big debate, even if you look at the founding fathers of the United States. There's an enormous debate about what was their education, their philosophical, religious background, right? There are people who go as far as saying that they were full atheists, and then, the point is how much that we believe today actually influences us on our actual, on a historical understanding. Right, and my guess here is that we probably don't have to go look that far or innovatively to really understand certain things that have been always under our eyes, and that we partly still look through the same eyes in part that we're looking at them in our medieval ancestors, like from our medieval ancestors. So still, even after this massive rationalist revolution, we have a massive treasure of traditions and but also behaviors and attitudes that are maybe just unintentional sometimes in our dreams, right? In our fantasy, in our images, mental images, in our feelings that actually constituted the world of the pre-modern man. That's why I try to bring on the fore also in Schwerpunkt to say, look, that there are pretty stupid things that as modern people do, and that we haven't the courage to discuss because they're based essentially on a sort of violent and barbarian and irrational contempt towards a phase of our history that actually gave us so much. I mean, if you think to be more intelligent or capable than a person who lived 1,000 years ago, this is all we'll often say is you're wrong, right? Also because we know today that being intelligent it can be a very different way. I mean, there are many different ways to be intelligent, and there are certain absolute scales as well that, in this sense, wouldn't make us, in proportion, look at ourselves very favorably in comparison to our ancestors in many ways. So, and incredibly, such images we were talking about, even, I mean, in the loss of our, in the, let's say, of the cultural organicity that they were framed in, and it comes straight from our most intimate memories, are often images of animals. Yes, they are. I mean, the ancients, especially the Egyptians and Babylonians, had populated of monsters, of beasts, of animals, their own pantheons and their skies, right? The monster, for example, is nor necessarily nor completely comparable to the beast. It could be the result of natural anomaly, right, or the sign of an extraordinary event, or the witnessing of the eruption of the divine in the human sphere. That's a huge deal for anybody who has studied ancient religions. Know how great deal of the ancient mentality gravitated around this aspect, and it's not a case. It's not by chance that for this very reason, um, this let's say mm, meaning was not always either necessary to the immediate experience of man, right? There are a lot of things that come through very deep um, realizations and experiences and practices and wisdoms that naturally we are detached from now. But maybe at the time it was less mediated in that regard, but still there were certain exoteric layers, if we could say, that were not access to anyone. I mean, the sacerdotal classes in this sense were educated and safeguarded in ways that naturally um, were in providing them with prerogatives that the rest of the population didn't. I mean, even in primitive societies, there is an enormous deal revolving about the fact that there are certain specific individuals that are the minority of the population that display very different features from others, and that for this reason they're actually outcasts, or better, they are fundamentally people who were not like the majority of others. These are usually the shamans. I mean, these figures that also have a very they're in connection with the divinity in some way that others can't understand. That's one of the best examples because these people become mediums with the divinity, and for the rest of society, that naturally society that revolves around this medium, right? For a lot of things, politics, war, right? We still have to discuss in Schwerpunkt these aspects relating to all the initiatory rites for warfare, all the various, bands of the ancient world, how did this work, and it has, and that's where the animals play in manner, because animals were the manifestation of a divinity, of spirits that could possess the man forever, so that they weren't these people, if famous, look at berserkers, like whatever the religion, I mean the various phases of the evolution, but that's not even a Nordic prerogative. It actually happened everywhere. It happened in Siberia, it happened in North America. Like it's if you look at it, it's actually the same identical thing everywhere in the world, in tribal societies. People wearing animal skins, not to get actively, to steal this power from animals, but because animals had taken possession of themselves, right, of them, and that's brutal, because we know that these people were out, right? They couldn't belong to society anymore. There was a deep change behind it. We have to talk about the Zippe and the Comitatus and how the thing revolved partially around this stuff. There was a devotion behind it. So even the myth that paganism was something open, in the sense that you just encountered the gods and you had to deal with them. Absolutely not. The gods could literally possess you and you were done for. Right, so it's a very different thing that explains that human problems are not erased by the levels of civilizations, if either there is such a thing, right? That there are deep existential matters that, in front of which reason cannot really answer, and we know it because we're mostly not rational beings, right? We are rational in the sense that we do own rationality, but we don't even get close to being rational because reason guides even a tiny part of what we do. So there is a degree of awareness. Probably when we look at also at animals, we say, "Oh, these guys don't rationalize," and that's our distinction, right? But if you were to look at how animals reason, well, you would realize probably that they don't do it in a very different. I mean, they actually do it in part. Like simply, they do it in a less powerful way than we do. But what is thinking anyway? Also, how does rationale intervene? What's consciousness? I mean, it's these are deep questions. I can't answer them because I don't know too much about them. But I mean, we tend to inferiorize animals in that regard, right? Saying, "Oh, you're a beast, you're an animal," right? As an insult. How can that be an insult? You would be more insulted to be mankind, looking at what would have been capable to do historically speaking. I mean, a constant bath of blood throughout all of our history. Like what humans did is pretty damn messed up. And this is not just about the 20th century. It's also the whole freaking story from the beginning to the end, right? And it will end like that probably, quite likely. But so often the monster here is something that goes beyond, right, the mere naturalistic observation. The monster was isolated fundamentally in another world, in another dimension. To think about all religions, I thought there were parallel realms of the world, right, including the one of the dead, one of the living. And so these monsters were different by nature and quality from the in its world also was by nature and quality different from the one of men. So this could be in the heavens, in the sea depths, right, in the womb of the earth, right, in also in faraway lands. Think about in the Middle Ages how all these travelers, especially in the 13th century, where the system was still inflating and expanding, and the Mongols had basically unified all the trade routes of Eurasia, and merchants from Europe crossed this most different, wildly different lands of, especially of Asia, right? And looking at all these different animals and peoples and customs, and they ideally thought, like, here these weird things happen, right? That's typical of the Middle Ages, all these stories of weird stuff. But even if you think about the Romans, that on their let's call them maps that they wrote down south of the Sahara, this major border and massive obstacle, right? And beyond which, they knew there were other peoples, but they said hic sunt leones, right? That is, here there are lions. Just to say that there was such wilderness that's the land of lions, essentially. And that's pretty weird, but you see there that the animal has a role in this regard to symbolize another reality. Naturally, that was done in imperial Rome, in which, if you want, civilization was fairly secularized compared to other areas, other times in history. Not more than the 13th century, right? But still, compared to a tribal society, it's evident that Roman culture wasn't quite like that. At least one of the elites. And the fact that these beings were often extraneous to the daily experience didn't change at all the fact that people believed in them at the time, because these were basically just a sign, right, witnessing a reality that was different from the one of man. That was the point. So also everything was because they didn't know what sometimes, even if you look at these animals, these monsters, they actually come from animals. They're still zoomorphic in many ways. So I don't know, they looked at things at sea and they thought they were, who knows, monsters, but those were actual animals that had simply had never seen. So that kind of support back the evidence that they of a world that didn't have, yes, that rational take on it, that a scientific, categorical, and confident take on reality, but it was still another way of coping, and also pretty effectively with the possibilities of that time, right? There was a strict connection between human existence and the one that, can't say even the supernatural one, but the one that that was there simply. Yeah, but it was intrinsic in nature, in the environment. Every place had a spirit, originally speaking. So there's a deep connection between the monster, the beast, and God, right? The human, the divine, the demonic, the ferine, right, met and blended continuously. And there is a difference you can trace in here. Before we said that the Roman world was kind of less, it was more or less secularized at certain parts of the Middle Ages. There are people who contest this, right? People say that essentially the mythological religious system of the Greeks and the Romans was, for example, deeply anthropomorphic, right? So that the blending of all these creatures together maybe wasn't as strong as later. I don't think it is true. As a matter of fact, it's pretty evident the contrary, that there is an astonishing amount of zoomorphic elements in that world. Albeit it is true that in a certain sense the acme of Greek and Roman civilization somewhat brought to first of all a crystallization in that system, that view, but also of that couldn't hide, however, that in the origin there was a deep tribal view on the world, right? That definitely bore the legacy of such ideas, right? Think about the metamorphosis, like that does connect even in the Hellenic and Roman religions. Man, God, the demon, the beast, right? So it happens all the time. So was, I don't know, 13th century Europe that different in this regard? I don't know. I think we are underestimating the if not excessively just the rationality, but also the pragmatic character of the medieval world in filling like these unknown gaps of nature, of knowledge, right, in a way that was somewhat more sophisticated actually than probably the average Roman subject, or even of the times of the Antonines. Actually, the Romans weren't just the guys in toga that went to the baths and spent a day doing nothing. I mean, the overwhelming majority of those worlds were peasants living in countryside. And these people, we know it, that they maintained for millennia, even through the Middle Ages, so throughout all the Roman Empire, from the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, actually a lot of beliefs that were pretty deeply rooted because they were connected to the agricultural side, the seasonal cycle, right, and those are also very interesting, fascinating topics to discuss. And we have this dramatic lack of evidence, in fact, exactly from those worlds. Like for the Middle Ages, you generally know what a priest, a citizen, but sometimes even a nobleman easily actually thought, right, or at least wrote, expressed in so many ways. When we come to the peasantry, well, that starts becoming very, very difficult. There is all a massive criticism to, for example, certain views of certain takes, at least a certain part of French historiography that was naturally and legitimately fascinated with the concept of universalism, of scholastics, rationality, this great political and social construction, feudalism of the cathedrals, that they were all one, in a kind of general hierarchy. But the question is being, and the sign, right? The idea of the world is decipherable in that way, and it's all, after all, a great symbol that must be read through. Well, yes, that surely exists. It's a medieval product, but what would you know actually about the average French peasant of the 12th, 13th century actually thought like? Because I don't think that could be shared the same time, but it's also, that's a perspective, deformation, if you want, but it's still meaningful, and it's possible that the peasant would approach certain thoughts at the same time. Who knows? It's very difficult, some say, others, but I don't know, but there is a sort of link, even a circularity in the states of being, that especially what we call as polytheism, in this sort of actually even animistic, we could say, immanentistic natures of reality in the mythical religious systems of antiquity is right. This is this eternal transformation, reshaping, remolding, right, of the world. So that's also where there is another criticism that I'm not completely in synchrony with. That is that religions as Christianity or already Judaism had introduced the new element, like a single God that is transcendent and creator, and man is his predilected creature. It's spiritual firstborn in some ways that actually participates of God's nature, participates to it, as it, and that in this sense, as it's especially evident in Christ, God and man is the mediator between God and creation, and therefore, as we were saying before, is the Lord of the creation because he belongs. He actually owns a material soul and a certain nefesh that has as its abode blood, that is the vital principle, and that distinguishes him from the other animals because he also has this principle that is being communicated by the divine breath, the spirit, the ruach. This is an idea that essentially brings to the consideration that Hebraism and Christianity and Islam feel themselves detached from the animal world. Now, there are important differences in here between religions, and there is definitely a common, however, element in which you can claim this is somewhat true in part, like the fact that these are not immanentistic systems like the previous ones. Monotheisms reject this. On the other hand, you can't say objectively that the previous cultures, the Hellenic and Roman, but also the Eastern ones, and the ones of the steppes, the culture of the steppes, that's something that has massively and radically reshaped in the entire Western civilization, and we constantly overlook, as you know, in Schwerpunkt we talk a big deal of that, and it's, if anything, the closest thing our dominant culture comes from, right? It's really the steppes, because also effectively the Hellenic and Roman ones came from there ancestrally, and also the Oriental ones weren't absolutely that far from them. On the contrary, sometimes they were even closer. That fundamentally influenced massively also the Christian world, especially between the 4th and the 6th century. And this is something we don't get enough, right? That even the same symbolical apparatus of the Bible does contain a massive amount of such monotheistic influence, right? And also the Christianity in itself, you see that it doesn't get rid of it over time. Like all these massive influences from the populations of the empire, the ones that had come into it afterwards. So these other peoples believe that at the borders didn't disappear. There wasn't a cultural block towards these traditions, right? The Christianization of Europe was pretty damn gradual, right? Very, very gradual, especially for those places where such beliefs were still the strongest. Because it is true that the empire had leveled, in part, even in all its diversity, still the many cults that had disappeared even before Christianity. I mean, we know about languages, for example, that disappeared in Roman times because Latin and Greek came to dominate in areas that weren't, that didn't have a substantial cultural resistance to this, and they were integrated also brutally, as we know, in the empire. And they transformed on that base. So this is what the deal is that religion didn't erase at all the presence of monsters, of beasts and animals that actually fuel, especially the devil's imaginary, like the demon's imaginary, and the idea is still in many. Well, there would be many. There are many surviving traditions in this regard as well. But at the same time, in Christianity, they pass under the veil of allegory to be part of the Christian religious fabric, right? As we were saying before, the tetromorphos, right? The dove, the lamb, the deer, fish, etc. And however, they get prolonged in Christianity, right? Christianity maintains this vigorous cultural presence of the ancient world, both for it's naturally a communicative strategy, right? There is there are images in the allegorical thinking of the Christian morality that need these, because they're easy symbols, and there is no aversion towards the representation of nature in this regard. So we have stressed this on many occasions in Schwerpunkt, how many elements of the polytheistic world actually remain still today in Christianity. But it's not that Christianity gets depleted by it, that it's less true in the sense as a religion, as a monotheism. It's simply that it has this massive cultural baggage that we try to depict uselessly as, a flat, weird message, as many people would like to see it, right? But it's actually an enormous synthesis of some of the major philosophies of the ancient world, and also that are pretty refined, fueling themselves also of very evocative images in which there is a massive non-animal symbolism of things that of course belonged to a world that had always been reasoning like that, and that had no reason to change under monotheism, because there was no under. It was a way that was fully. It was a religion was fully compatible with the symbolism of the time. It was boosted by it, right? It was fueled by it, and this can be seen everywhere. We see it in the Romanesque and Gothic sculpture, in the heraldic symbols, in the encyclopedic treatises, cultural elaborations of presences that can obviously be either fake or like monsters or actual animals, but they're still signs, right? So it doesn't even make sense, as we were saying before, to distinguish the monster from the real animal, because it's obviously that the centaurus and sirens weren't existed, while the wolf and the bear did, right? And so, but the medieval man didn't reason according to categories of this type, right? The centaurus and the siren were so familiar to the medieval man than the wolf and the bear, right? But also the horse and of the dog, right? And in the sense that we want to stress here that is the allegorical one. And medieval people were terribly curious, like they wanted to know a lot. Actually, there's never been a single moment in history in which people were more thirsty of knowledge, but of genuine curiosity, this inexhaustible research for understanding, like in the Middle Ages. It didn't happen in the 18th century, it didn't happen with Enlightenment. It's actually a medieval thing. It started from there, right? Those are the seeds of what eventually even those other scientific revolutions would occur. Think about scholastics, right? What is more rationalistic than that? It's trying to make sense in a world where that had such a large and complicated cultural legacy that could be framed what could frame one together all Aristotle into Christianity. I mean, it was massive. It was huge. It required an enormous confidence, an enormous intellectual awareness. And where do you find, especially if you think that those people at the time believed genuinely about the universality of that construction? It was an enormous feat in proportion, a huge achievement, much greater in comparison than relatively to the times than in fact the scientific revolution. So, and that's in the allegory that we all have to look at here. That is, it's the disenchantment that we've went through that we have to realize when we look at the roots of our imaginary, because the imaginary is always there, and we still feel for it, and we still, it's natural. What I would like to stress, also in certain, there is a deeper consideration in this regard, to say better, that there are probably certain universal languages here involved, right? It's not a matter of, it's not just cultural. There are certain feelings and attitudes that make us all human, and that are fueled essentially by our common genetic, background, and that strike us because we recognize it in other humans as well, right? This is a journey. This series I want to start really in the human awareness of it. It's not about the animals in themselves. It's about the way we feel about them, which is something that humans probably have recollected. I mean, and that's why ancient religions actually passed through the symbolisms as well, because they realized there was a universal standard in a world that hadn't any, from a strictly here it's difficult to tell, right? Not from a cultural point of view, but I mean the fact that the world was such a limited set of explanations, but not just in terms of scientific knowledge, but also of actual life expectancy and even political limits, right? In this regard, there was this world that was so rich and wide that it populated, permeated these cultures because they lived so much, even close to it, that evidently, well, this backed their understanding of the world. And it made them highlight the actual, I would say, scientific side of it. And it's difficult to put it in these terms because, I don't know, we could also talk about history of medicine. I think it would be very fascinating at one point, but for saying that there were a lot of things that these people got wrong, definitely about the physics of science as we know it today, but I mean, some of them, they knew them pretty damn well. In a way, it was not just by chance. So all this set of wisdoms and of, blending knowledge and etc. actually produced something pretty interesting, which the symbolism was so necessary even as a form of language, of communication, as we were saying before. That's even for Christianity as well, that we can observe. Alright, today I'm particularly tired because this morning I had to accelerate my routine for unexpected reasons, but so I was a bit like, but okay, I hope tomorrow to say better. And anyway, for now we can stop it here. So I will come with this at one point, and we will start with this, I don't know when, like in 2 weeks. As we were saying before, it's not going to be a very invasive series, like it's going to be fairly moderate in this regard. But at the same time, I hope it's going to be, interesting, because really you can, before you're acquainted with certain topics, you say how much there could be to say about it. Actually, there is a lot to say about it, and this enters in many fields that are difficult even to expand in without specific competence. But I will try now to do my best, but it's just an overview. Then maybe one day we could go take this further, right? There are definitely these are topics that can never be exhausted. Anyway, so for now, I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time. See you next time.